question time, and I give the call to the member for Durack.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise today to speak on Appropriation Bills number 1 and 2, 2024 to 2025. Whilst I won't oppose these bills, ensuring the government programs are funded, I must express my deep disappointment at this year's budget. The central promise made by the Prime Minister at the last election was that if you voted for him and the Labor Party, you would be better off. Life would be cheaper, life would be better. However, as we all know, the opposite has occurred and the cost of living has gone through the roof, impacting every Australian household. Housing, well, that's up 12%. Rents, they're up 12% as well. Insurance is up 26%, and in many parts of my electorate significantly more than that 26%. Electricity is up 18% and gas is up 25%. Of course, the dozen interest rate rises that have occurred under this Labor government have amounted to severe mortgage stress for so many Australian families. Despite promising cheaper mortgages, the typical Australian household with a mortgage is more than $35,000 worse off. The budget provided the government with the perfect opportunity to outline a plan to get homegrown inflation under control, which will in time enable the Reserve Bank to reduce interest rates. Unfortunately, the government is now doubling down on their big spending agenda and failing energy and migration policies. And it's not just the Liberal Party that's raising significant concerns with this year's budget. Steve Hamilton, a renowned economist, described it as reckless and the most irresponsible budget in recent memory. This budget means higher inflation for longer. A worrying sign today, of course, sees an increase in CPI to 3.6%, up from 3.5% last month. Deputy Speaker, I recently caught up with a team at Food Bank in Geraldton, and incredibly, Food Bank are now servicing dual-income families because they can no longer afford their groceries. How shameful it has come for a country as so rich as Australia, where we now have the working poor, and sadly more and more dual-income families are walking through the doors of Food Bank looking for help. And despite this $315 billion of extra spending, the regions are still being left behind. Now, given the limited amount of time that I'm going to have to speak in this debate tonight, I will swiftly remind the House that there has now been a 2-year funding drought for regional infrastructure after Labor abolished the Building Better Regions Fund and cancelled grants to the successful applicants under Round 6. In October 22, Labor announced the Building Better Regions Fund would be substituted by the Growing Regions Program. Sounded pretty good at the time. Now, as what could be expected with this funding drought, many applications were made under the new program. In fact, there was 440 applications that were initially assessed as worthy by the Regional Development Department and a parliamentary panel which was handpicked by the Minister for Infrastructure. Incredibly, 90% of regional projects were rejected, despite the government confirming the program underspend of $93.4 million, or 31% of the provided funds. So not only did Labor bin 9 out of 10 applications, only 2/3 of the funding promised for the Growing Regions program's first round was actually spent. I want to take the opportunity to congratulate the Shire of Wyndham East Kimberley for their successful application for funding towards an extension of the runway at the East Kimberley Regional Airport, which is a very worthy project. And I just want to note that the previous government, when we were in government, we had also provided them with funding for important infrastructure funding, also for their airport. I'd also like to congratulate the Midwest Community Living Association, who will receive funding towards the creation of an inclusive, multi-purpose opportunity hub in Geraldton, which will support independent living and training for people with disabilities. I am particularly pleased for this organisation, who provides such a critical service to those in need in the Midwest, so well done. Unfortunately, there were many other very worthy organisations and local communities that had their projects rejected. These included projects like the construction of the Newman Youth and Community Hub, the Broome Regional Resource Recovery Park, the Lower Chittering Community Centre and the new Marine Rescue Facility in Port Hedland. This is just to name a few of the very worthy unsuccessful applicants from my electorate. Many of these projects could have been funded if the program had been delivered as promised, or perhaps from other areas of government waste and spending, like the $40 million that the government has spent to advertise the revised tax cuts, or the wasteful $450 million that was spent on the failed Voice referendum. So, as we see once again, it's not about money. It's not about money. It's about priorities. And clearly, regional Australia is not a priority for the Albanese Labor Government. I hope that those opposite understand the disappointment and anger of the applicants that have missed out, especially the ones that were encouraged to do, after the expression of interest process, then encouraged to spend more time and energy to complete a full application. Not only did the government choose to gut the program, but they failed to deliver the funding announcements on time. Amazingly, the guidelines for the program stated, if you are successful, you must commence your project no later than the 15th of May 2024. Well, it's a little bit hard when the successful applicants were actually announced on the 16th of May. So they told you you've got to have started spending the money, start the project by the 15th of May, but they didn't tell anybody who was going to be successful until the 16th of May. Honestly, what sort of show is this mob running? The government's failures through the Growing Regions program are simply just indicative of a broader trend of neglect for regional infrastructure. Also foreshadowed in the budget is the abolition of the mobile black spot program from 2026-27. People won't be surprised that this is a very successful program by the Coalition, funded somewhere in the proximity of 1,500 new mobile phone towers in areas where the telcos tell us that it's not commercially viable for them to build the towers themselves. So people will understand that an electorate like Durack, being the largest in our country, that we were a major beneficiary, and I don't think anybody would hold that against the people of Durack because there is such great need. But there is still great need. So I can tell you my constituents will be very disappointed to hear that in a few years that program will be gone. So not only will this have a drastic impact in case of emergencies, whether they're to do with health or a natural disaster, there is also just no escaping that mobile connectivity is so important to participating in the modern world, and that's whether you live in Marble Bar or you live in Chittering or you live in Geraldton. The Mobile Black Spot program joins a long list of regional programs that have been abolished by the Albanese Labor Government. These include, as I've said before, the Building Better Regions Fund, the Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Program, which was so important during COVID, which kept those local councils and those local tradies afloat and enabled our local councils, and I represent some 41 local councils, enabled them to be able to get those small, low-hanging fruit projects done. And for the last 2 years, all I've heard about is how important that local roads and community infrastructure program was, and it's a real shame that this government hasn't continued with that. Also, community development grants and of course, the wonderful Stronger Communities program, which my friend here, the member for Hinckley, will know, such an important program because it was, and I know the Deputy Speaker will agree with me, it was a program that the local member could control together with a community committee. It made such a difference to identifying those important projects throughout the whole of the electorate, and it's a real shame. It's a shame on the Labor government for not continuing with that program. But I did have some hope that in the budget that we would see a return of the Stronger Communities program, which, as I've said, has helped so many grassroots organisations in my electorate. And I thought this was a very strong possibility because I have seen so many of my colleagues on the other side, time after time, spruiking how wonderful the Stronger Communities program is when they would get up and talk about in a 90-second statement or a 3-minute constituency statement. So I had great hope and faith that we might have had a return to the Stronger Communities program. Alas, that program was not refunded. So in conclusion, despite the government's obvious failures that they have not provided funding in the budget for any new programs to support regional economic development, it's clear to me that only a change in government will lead to the prioritisation of regional infrastructure, particularly in Western Australia, particularly in regional and remote parts. Likewise, only a change in government will result in a return to sensible economic management. We will get inflation down, restore the Australians' dream of home ownership and abandons Labor's reckless renewables-only strategy. The election will provide a clear choice for Australians, and it cannot come soon enough.